Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you. Some of you were on my tour yesterday and remembered that I'm a teacher, so I appreciate the call and response. There can be no greater issue than that of conservation in this country. Theodore Roosevelt said that in Chicago in August of 1912. He was not a young man making a first argument. He was a former president vying for a third term, telling the country what mattered most. He was a man rarely without a strong opinion on nearly every subject he encountered. Of all of them, though, this is the one that he named as the greatest. More than a century later, this issue is still unfurling, being discussed and debated and moved forward. And we think that those conversations and many of the actions that they spur are worthwhile, especially when they are defined by caring deeply, thinking boldly, and daring greatly. Good afternoon and welcome everybody to the Theodore Roosevelt Presidential Library. My name is Marcy Whale and I oversee public programs and education here at the TRPL. It matters that we're having this conversation today right here and not somewhere else. Roosevelt first came here in 1883 to hunt bison while there was still bison left to hunt. He returned the next year after the deaths of his wife and his mother, looking for a place large enough to contain his grief. What matters in particular was that this is the very landscape that taught him many things. In just a few years, he watched open range ranching strain the grasslands, wildlife populations decline, and competing demands collide. The Badlands showed him that land was neither a museum piece nor commodity alone. It was a living, dynamic thing that people used, they loved, they argued over, and if they intended to pass it on, it was something that had to be stewarded. Long before conservation became policy, proclamation, or politics, before it was even a common word in the day's lexicon, it was a practical lesson learned here on working land. If there's a cradle of American conservation movement, it is in this landscape that you are situated in right now. And this is where an idea first took shape before Roosevelt carried it forth into the White House. But that idea that he carried forward into the White House was never simple, it was never straightforward, and it was never one-sided. It was hunting, and it was science. It was public land, and it was private stewardship. It was policy made in Washington, and it was a rancher walking his grounds in the Badlands, deciding what to leave standing. This afternoon, we'll carry that same range forward, 5 conversations over 3 hours, moving across the same wide field that Roosevelt claimed as one issue. The future of national parks, the place of hunting and conservation, regenerative agriculture, and what it takes to feed a country without exhausting the land that feeds it. New technology and what stewardship looks like when the tools change faster than the traditions do, and closing a day, a look at conservation from, quite literally, the perspective of the furthest frontiers. The people on this stage don't always share one. The National Park Service and PERC, a hunting advocate and a rancher, a biotech company, and an acclaimed NASA scientist. Roosevelt kept company like that too. He built the conservation movement by putting people who disagreed with each other in the same room and making them work it out. That's what today asks of this room as well. A quick word on how this afternoon runs. Registration covers the whole block. Stay for one conversation or stay for all 5. At 2 o'clock, the Future of National Parks opens the day with representatives from PERC and the National Park Service, 2 organizations that discuss how public land should be managed, and a conversation worth having. At 2:30, Hunting and Conservation brings Hunter Nation CEO Keith Mark and Mark Oz Geist to the stage. At 3:30, Feeding America with Regenerative Agriculture features Molly Engelhart on Sovereignty Ranch, on land management as conservation that happens on working ground, not only protected ground. At 4, Technology and Stewardship gathers voices from Colossal Biosciences, Rainmaker, and Terra Nova. And at 4:30, the day closes with Dr. Nicola Fox of NASA, pushing the frontier of science and conservation, proof that the instinct to understand and protect what's fragile doesn't stop at this atmosphere. Roosevelt called conservation the greatest issue of his country in 1912, and he didn't mean it was settled. He meant it was unfinished, and that unfinished work is exactly what a new generation is picking back up, which is what brought everyone here in this room together in the Badlands. Thank you for joining us out here in the Western Territory of North Dakota in a place that made a president. We are so happy to have you here. The first session will begin shortly.
Hello, everyone. Wow, that's pretty loud. How are we doing? I like to hear that. I'm Sam Lebo. I'm the External Affairs Manager at the American Conservation Coalition. I'm joined to my right by Sarah Sutherland, the Senior Research Fellow at the Property and Environment Research Center, or PERC, and Rachel Daniels, the Superintendent of the Theodore Roosevelt National Park, right next door. We'll be discussing the past, present, and future of America's national parks, and what better place to do that than right next door to Theodore Roosevelt National Park and the Badlands of North Dakota. Before we dive in, Rachel and Sarah, could you each say a few words about your work and what brought you here today?
Please. Start? Test. Okay. Hi, good afternoon, everybody. I am Rachel Daniels. It's a privilege to be here with you this afternoon. I think I met most of you this morning over at the park. But yeah, what brought me here today? This was never my goal. I never wanted to be a superintendent. In fact, I would argue I spent many years avoiding this type of work. But my most recent assignment before coming out here, I served as the Chief of Staff for the Midwest region of the National Park Service. I served in that role for 6 years, and I would have described myself as a utility player being sent across 13 states to 63 different national parks to sort of help with issues, partnerships, events, whatever the case may be. And I had a firsthand look at what our superintendents are dealing with on the ground, on the day-to-day. And I thought, wow, I want to do that too. I can be effective in that role too. And in that role, I was initially brought out here, maybe 4 years ago or so, for a very early partnership conversation with the leadership of the Presidential Library. And the folks that work here that created this space, this movement, if you will, in conservation, I just truly believe in them and what they are doing, and am excited about their ingenuity and ability to problem solve. That when the permanent role came open out here, I thought, how do I not jump into the arena with these guys? And so it truly is the library that brought me out here in this capacity. So it's a pleasure to be here.
Thanks, that's great. Sarah?
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me here today. And I am a Senior Research Fellow at PERC. And for those of you who don't know about PERC, the Property and Environment Research Center, we are focused on incentive-based conservation. And we have a big part of our research portfolio, or one of our main buckets that we focus on, is public lands. And so I started at PERC, I think about 7 or 8 years ago, through a fellowship program, which some of you guys, we have internships and fellowship programs you guys should look into. But I did work on the historic funding of national parks. And then I proceeded to do some other work on Yosemite and Hetch Hetchy. And I've always loved the outdoors, and any excuse I can get to actually come to national parks and go meet your heroes, go meet the superintendents. And it's rare that an economist actually gets to go out in the field, and this is as close as I get. And so I'm excited to be here. I'm also a lecturer at UC Davis, and I love working with students, and it's really inspiring to see all you guys here. Some of you I got to sit in the lobby with. You didn't know it, but you guys were having breakfast, and I was getting to hear all of your enthusiasm and excitement, and I was really excited that I get to be a part of this today.
That's great. Yeah, I want to start off by going a bit bigger picture for a moment. I've been reading a book, Earning the Rockies by Robert Kaplan, and it argues that America's continental geography, stretching from sea to shining sea, has profoundly shaped our national character and our achievements on the world stage. The author spends a great deal of time reflecting on the West and the frontier ethos that came with it. One such example that he cites is how westward expansion in the 19th century enabled us to achieve great things in the 20th century, most notably liberating Europe not once, but twice, along with the Indo-Pacific and the two world wars. And these reflections on the frontier ethos got me thinking a lot about the American landscape and how it informs and shapes the American identity, especially as we celebrate 250 years since our founding. The past few days, we've learned a tremendous great deal about how young Teddy Roosevelt, his own frontier ethos and spirit was shaped here by this very landscape. As two leading voices and practitioners in this space of public lands and conservation, I'm curious if you have any reflections on America's national identity.
Yeah, I can jump in. I think I would add to that you know, these spaces, this geography, this landscape that's behind me here, it's timeless. It transcends time, right? It was here long before us. It's going to be here long after us. And human beings, we don't change that much, right? There's a potential Teddy Roosevelt in this room, right? We can all have that transformational, inspirational experience out in that landscape. You know, I talk to visitors every week that come out here either on life's highest high and life's lowest lows, and they get lost in this landscape. They discover themselves. They find renewed purpose, vision, drive, enthusiasm. It happened for Teddy in such a big way for our nation that it resulted in the only national park named for a person. And I cannot think of a more iconic leader deserving of that distinction, nor a more perfect landscape to complement what this place meant for Teddy. And I think that's the beauty of it, is it's these lands and this geography that shape the people, shape our leaders, our events, our lives happen in these spaces, and it's a forever thing.
I think also for who it made us, it reminds us who we are as people, as a country, where you come to these landscapes and you're like, wow, this country is epic. Like, we have come a long way. We, you know, expanded through the West, and you have everybody's here to love it and be a little bit more rugged. And no matter, you know, what your politics are or what that is, it seems to go out the door. And this seems to be something that everyone can unite on and appreciate, is, you know, or cherish public lands.
Let's move to the public lands and national parks themselves. Rachel, one of the largest national park challenges discussed in DC today is the maintenance backlog. Projects that should happen but haven't happened yet, mostly due to funding constraints. Most recent estimates suggest a $19 billion backlog across the national park system. Earlier this morning, you discussed how every week you're having to repair fences because of bison escaping the park. Can you tell us a little bit more about how the maintenance backlogs affect your experience as a national park leader? And yeah.
Yeah, so maintenance is a huge issue across the National Park Service. It's certainly not a new issue. I've been with the agency almost 17 years, and that's been one of the common themes throughout my career. And as a leader in the National Park Service, you do see firsthand how that impacts the visitor experience and our ability to protect resources, even the bison and the fencing example. But you know, I think we are set up in such a way today, though, that we can't just sit back and say, wow, $19 billion, like, that's too big, that's too much. We have to ask ourselves, not only what can we do, but who can we do it with? And it's just such a perfect example to me that I'm sitting on this stage in this auditorium today, because our new partnership with the Presidential Library is, you know, when enthusiasm and ingenuity can team up together, we truly have endless possibilities to combat age-old issues in new ways. And our partnership with the library is putting us at the forefront of that for the agency, serving as a model. You know, we have big ideas to combat housing together for both our staff, the library staff, the community of Medora. I have also seen firsthand the power of the Park Service partnering with other organizations like the National Park Foundation, our state and local governments, nonprofits, tribes. We have a very new or a very exciting new project happening off of I-94 with our Painted Canyon Visitor Center redevelopment project. We are piloting a first of its kind partnership with the National Park Foundation to completely revitalize that landscape entirely with private dollars. And so it's all about partnerships, reach across the aisle. And it's not just, you know, what can these organizations do for me, do for the park, but how can the park support and enhance our partner organizations' operations as well? And that's, you know, that's how we get it done. I see great work happening every day to make strides with our maintenance issues. That problem's never going to go away. We just have to keep talking to each other and figuring out new ways to secure funding and secure resources and expertise that can join us.
Sarah, much of your research has focused on this very issue of generating new revenue streams for the national parks. Can you touch a bit on that?
Yeah, so from an academic side, as an economist, we have a lot of ideas about ways to make money. And how much any of those can be implemented, you know, not to the full extent. I went to Disneyland, and I'm not saying the Park Service should operate like Disneyland, but I was like, these guys really know how to extract every dollar out of you. And I'm not saying we should do that here, but economists, fees are a really obvious option. And there's different ways to implement fees, right? So we just had the international visitor fee, which is a cool premise because that operates under the assumption that this is a much smaller portion of your trip expenditure and you don't contribute to the tax base, so you pay a little bit more, right? But there are other groups that could pay more. That's a really simple answer. You know, there's flexibility. There could be differences in concierge fees or concessionaire fees. There is a really cool idea about, in the same way that supports land for hunting and fishing, with like you pay a tax on ammo for that, a potential gear tax for outdoor apparel and things like that for people who are recreating on these lands. Most likely that goes back to the Park Service. But you know, anything from a fast lane to parking charges during congestion, different ways that you can add new experiences while maintaining accessibility of the park. There's a big menu of different options for funding. And then the public-private partnerships, or, you know, the national park, you guys are great. You're telling me about all these things you're doing with your partners. That's another avenue in which you can support park operations outside of looking for appropriations.
Looking towards the future, Rachel, you said earlier that this landscape is timeless, and you know, no one can deny that, seeing the gradations in the rock, right? But I'd love to hear your perspective, because the landscape does change over time, and particularly as the climate warms and species ranges shift. How is the national park changing management strategies now, and do you anticipate things might change in the future?
Sure. Well, I think it's really important to note that the landscape is always changing. It has always changed, and it always will change. And as far as the management approach, one thing with the Park Service and here at the park that actually hasn't changed is we take an adaptive management approach. So I guess the management approach is that our management is always changing as well. We monitor wildlife populations, wildlife movement, water resources. You know, we're constantly utilizing that type of data in the park, and we will continue to do so. And it's just our responsibility to, take those results and, pivot in ways that the conditions tell us that we need to as we continue into the future. And so I think just our willingness and ability to continue adapting and being flexible when we learn more, make a shift where we think that we need to do so. And I think just that's what we've been doing, and I see us continuing that type of approach into the future.
And Sarah, you've touched on this a little bit in your work on national park management policy, suggesting some innovative updates to these decades-old rules that govern the park system. The management strategy for Yellowstone, when it was founded in 1872, is much different than it is today. Can you talk a little bit about how that management policy has shifted over time?
Sure. So the reason I got into national parks was one of the reasons because it has such a fascinating history of why the National Park Service formed from when this was after the damming of the Tuolumne River for Hetch Hetchy to provide water for the city of San Francisco by the Raker Act. Just a historical tidbit, but this was really contentious, and it's rumored that John Muir and Pinchot it ruined their friendship and it broke John Muir's heart. But after this happened, and it's a way to ensure that the Park Service was protected, because you just had a few one-off parks, I think 17 at the time of the establishment of the National Park Service. They wanted a unified front. And they formed the National Park Service with the Organic Act. And with that, you have now a group that can go and speak for themselves. Like, we don't want a new reservoir here, or we don't want this running through our park, or these electrical lines. But at first, the management objectives were the justification for damming the Tuolumne, and now we have Hetch Hetchy at Yosemite, is that nobody uses this, nobody's gonna see this, it has no value. And so that message was heard loud and clear. And the Park Service, when it initially formed, they went to get people to come to the parks, right? So they're making deals with the railroads, they're putting out flyers as much as one can send out that message in the early 1900s. And so they eventually get more people in, but then to further their, I guess you'd say, influence and power and security, they tried to increase their constituents by adding more properties, adding things like battlefields, adding things like Bill Clinton's house, and just random things. You're like, that's part of the Park Service, that's weird. But if you think about it from a political economy perspective, that gives you, more influence in that. So over time, there's, I think, this trade-off between also the original mission was preservation for future generations, but also maintaining visitation and having that experience for people and that sort of balance. And so I think there's been some ups and downs along the road, and changing how they collect, starting to collect fees and how much money is put into the parks and allowing parks to keep that money. So there's been evolution over time, and there've been some cool little chapters and books about it. If you guys have more interest, I'll tell you. But I'm not going to take the next 9 minutes, so we can move on.
Just before we move to audience Q&A, because I'm sure some of our members have a lot of questions, I'd love to, we're celebrating America 250 right now, and I want to take a look at the more distant future. Looking ahead, what are you most excited about for the national parks in America for the next 250 years? Are there any underrated opportunities or challenges that people aren't aware of?
Sure. Yeah. I think, for me, what I am most excited about for the next 250 is expanding our reach and our accessibility to more people, to first-time visitors, to populations that maybe they have never been to a national park before. And again, sitting here in this auditorium today in the Presidential Library, having a destination like this out here that is going to increase the amount of people coming through that are then going to explore the park as well is incredibly exciting to me, we have got to tap into and access the next generation and instill a sense of responsibility in that next generation, so that these places can last. And so that excites me. Reaching new audiences. I did not grow up visiting national parks. This sort of happened to me by chance initially, but that's another story for another day. But I have 4 children, and I see it in them now when they are out in this park and we let them go. They have this sense of spirit and stewardship about them now that can only be learned by being in the landscape. I wish I could say they got it from me, but they didn't. They're getting it from the land. And so that is an opportunity that we have too, that excites me for the next 250. And I think one of the risks that we need to be careful of is, I think for myself looking back, I didn't know it, but I can say it now. I think we take for granted that these places are just gonna be here because we're from the outside looking in, and that's a huge risk. These places, we cannot assume that they're gonna take care of themselves, because they're not. We have to be intentional so that we are leaving this legacy behind for the next generation and the generation after that. And the reason that the national parks have endured the way that they have is because generations of Americans before us have intentionally decided that these places matter. And so we have to continue that conservation ethic, that spirit of stewardship. So I see that as the risk, but there's also excitement in that to me. And then I'm a big partnerships person. I mean, the opportunities in the future to continue partnering with other organizations, nonprofits, tribes, state, local governments, there's no problem that we can't solve if we get together and tackle it as one, because the challenges facing these places are far larger than any one organization can solve on their own.
Do we have any questions from the audience?
Test.
As a rancher, I'm deeply saddened by what happened at Point Reyes, and I'm wondering if you view that that's the trajectory that we're going, or that there is possibilities of ranchers and farmers partnering with the national parks, and that can actually be, like she mentioned, Disneyland or more things. Like, what if those dairy farmers, instead of being kicked out, started a A2 creamery and was selling A2 organic ice cream at Point Reyes, and then more people I'm just saying there's so many ways that they could partner. And then you see the politics getting involved in Montana and bison versus cattle on public lands and all these kind of tit for tat that are very politically motivated. But I believe that there could be extraordinary partnerships through conservation, regenerative agriculture in the national parks. But I'm wondering, I don't see that we're moving in that direction. What do you guys think about that?
Ooh, that's
Great
a
question.
big one.
I think so I'll take the politically charged question. Sure. I don't mind it. So I think it's a really interesting question. PERC is doing, not to plug PERC, but to plug PERC, we're doing work right now with like virtual fencing, which would allow for, the removal of fences and things that, people who are really concerned with recreation and wildlife are concerned about, and allowed for more, directed grazing, because a lot of times this has already been mentioned, but we can be partners, right? Like, these goats can help to reduce wildfire risk and things like that. And so I really think that it's up for up to young minds, and who creates Halter, who creates Rainmaker, and people like this to come at it from a different angle, because I do think there's something about what's been ingrained institutionally is that we should fight each other. And when you go in with that frame of mind that it's the rancher versus the recreationist or the park, you sort of automatically put yourself in a position for failure when there are other options.
We have time for maybe one or two more.
Thanks so much. In his book, Edward Abbey,
or in his book, Desert Solitaire, Edward Abbey explores tensions of overdevelopment of national parks with the need to preserve national parks. He also explores tensions of overvisitation in national parks, potentially diminishing the opportunity for people to experience them in their truest form. I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on how you navigate those tensions, which I think is a healthy tension, but how we navigate those tensions, or if you have any broader thoughts on the book. I know it's very popular amongst a lot of national parks enthusiasts. Thanks so much.
Yeah, that's a great comment and is a significant challenge. You know, oftentimes our mission is at odds with itself, right? Preserve unimpaired for this and future generations, but also allowing for the use and enjoyment, right? And how do we do both, and how can we do both well? And you know, I want visitors to come to my park. I want new visitation, and that's why I think it is so important that by allowing that access, we instill that conservation ethic and that sense of stewardship into those folks, because you know, when the visitors come in, that's a potential advocate for us. That's a potential steward of the land. And you know, just today walking through headquarters, you know, I watched visitors disgusted that they saw some litter on the ground and pick it up, and I was like, yes, like that's you know, so we might be seeing, you know, increased visitation and the challenges that come along with that. But if we're instilling the right you know, ethic and stewardship mindset into those folks, I think it could be leveraged as opportunity as well.
All right, time for one last question. Who wants it?
Hi, so I'm from Utah, so we have 5 national parks, and so I love national parks. I've been to a lot. I'm always curious kind of about the visitation piece, like when there is a decline in visitation, what are national parks doing about that? Because it's not something that you can like make a new product or something like that. It's always going to be the same. How do you deal with it? And is that a concern that you guys are facing?
So a decline in visitation.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I have been out here. I'm approaching the 2-year mark out here, and I will say, from my chair specifically at this place, I have not had to combat that issue. And I think you know, due to where we're sitting today, we are anticipating an increase in visitation out here. But in terms of just across the service, you know, declining visitation, because you know, some of our smaller sites, like you know, Sarah, you referenced the Clinton birthplace home, and that one made me chuckle because that was in my old portfolio. But you know, other places across the Park Service do struggle, and again, it's the power in the partnerships. You know, you're from Utah, you have the Big Five. That is a highly marketed, tourist attractive experience. And so when these smaller, more struggling sites, for lack of a better word, can leverage off of success of maybe larger, like neighbor sister parks, I think we can see success. We have launched, you know, various different promotional or marketing type campaigns to try and get folks to lesser visited places as well. And I think it kind of gets back to the other question too. When we can highlight lesser visited places, we can also alleviate some of the strain on our more highly frequented visited places. So I don't know if I answered that at all, but I tried.
I think that was really good, because when you gave your response to the previous question, I was thinking, you know, there's a lot of people at certain times in certain places, but you can still a lot of times find solitude even in the busiest of parks if you go a mile off of the trail. And not only reorganizing people in time and space within a park, but between parks is like the opportunity. And I don't know, you know, there's marketing opportunities and stuff. I think you guys in Utah had to kill your Come to Our Parks campaign because it was too successful. So maybe hire your marketing team and everything will be okay. But yeah.
Great. And with that, we are at time, but please give our panelists a big round of applause. Next up, we'll have Taylor joined by Keith and Mark on hunting and conservation.